Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So, taking on a super fun and super exciting episode for you guys today because I am doing my final Analogue 3D review. I've spent about a month using this thing day in and day out, doing some tests on different videos, even having some friends over for some N64 game nights, even if my wife and I are packing up to move shortly. It's one of those things, what you get in the box versus what it's like after a month is always going to be different once that day one and even week one shine wears off. I'm going to be talking about my long-term impressions of the Analogue 3D and whether or not when it does restock, I think it is worth buying if you are an N64 collector or fan. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But I've tested basically everything you possibly can on the Analogue 3D, the turbo modes, different ROM hacks and everything else, so we're going to be getting into it today. But I will say, after my time spent with the Analogue 3D, I am absolutely still impressed with the overall build quality and form factor of this case and design. Analogue always makes a really good looking console, probably the best in the business in that respect, and this one definitely looks good next to my television, even if most of the things next to my TV are packed up at this point in time. The 4 controller ports, everything being recessed properly, it really just is a fun design, and it really does a great job of running N64 carts, making it look like a modern N64. So as far as the physical object is concerned, 100% think this is a great design, and I think the Analogue did a 10 out of 10 job actually making a physical object that you do interface with. But around the back, one of the things that I really am missing compared to Mr. FPJ and even my N64 console has got to be the ability to actually hook it up to a CRT television, because in my opinion, N64 was meant for CRTs. It just looks so good on that actual beam, really does blend a lot of the textures and make it look a little bit nicer, because for as far as scalers are concerned, sure you can go to 4K, but it still looks like an N64, which means it's blurry. And yes, the Analogue 3D definitely has the advantage of 4K output versus Mr. FPJ, unless you have something like a Retro Tank or a Pixel Effects more 4K, so I totally get if you want that 4K experience, Analogue 3D has you covered. And I will say, using the original N64 controller feels as genuine of an experience as using it on a real console. One of those things, I always found this controller to be a little bit hand crampy, but in my experience this time around, it does seem to be a little bit more comfortable. But all of the analog values and everything going into the Analogue 3D on the original controller feel accurate to me. I can play all the platformers and everything else I want with that original feel. But I will say, in my time spent with the 8-bit Do controller on the Analogue 3D, I just do not enjoy it whatsoever. It's actually a really good controller for emulation on PC if you want to do N64, but there's something about the analog values, especially when you try to get Mario to creep in Super Mario 64, that just don't really feel all that accurate to me. And that is a little bit of a bummer, because I was looking forward to just sitting on my couch having a wireless experience, but I find myself 10 out of 10 times plugging in my original N64 controller, which really isn't Analogue's issue whatsoever. 8-bit Do made the controller, even if apparently they do share some of the same staff, but it's one of those things. This is kind of where I was let down on this actual controller and its analog values. As far as the comfort is concerned and the button placement, everything there is exceptional, so maybe this is something that could be patched up with a software update either to the controller or to the Analogue 3D in the future, but that pairing, the controller and console, really didn't make much of a difference to me, honestly. But the nice thing is, and this has been a while now, flash cards have been made to work, even in overclock mode, and even though that isn't an Analogue 3D thing, I still think they should have sent those to the makers to test to make sure they were working day one. The rest of the community went out and made sure their own hardware worked on Analogue 3D, so that definitely is an impressive thing, and you gotta thank all of the different flash card makers for making sure that happened. But I will say my number one takeaway is overclock mode, just like on Mr. FPJ, absolutely makes some games playable on N64 that I really can't go back to anymore. Because if I plug Perfect Dark into my original N64 and go over to my PVM, it certainly looks pretty, but the performance just makes me want to play any other version of the game than that original. So this has definitely been something that's going to be revelatory for a lot of people. So if you haven't picked up an Analogue 3D yet, you're thinking about doing it, you're definitely going to get a really good experience when it comes to turbo mode or overclock mode as they call it. I just always say turbo because that's what we have on the Mr. FPGA. You're just getting so many more frames per second in so many of the best N64 games out there. It really is a massive night and day difference. Now, as far as the overall feature set for the scan lines and different shadow masks, I think they are perfectly fine, but I don't really think they're doing all that much of the heavy lifting here, and honestly, I run it on clean basically every single time I play the games. Hopefully sometime in the future, Analogue is going to bring more of these options and more granular settings to the mix because you get a decent amount, but as far as that massive FPGA chip in Analogue 3D, considering the fact that something like the RetroTink 4K or Pixel FX More 4K and even Mr. FPGA have a massive suite of filters that aren't on Analogue, this is an area in which I just wish there were more options. Now again, it's only been in my hands for about a month now, but it is one of those things. Analogue 3D always felt like maybe it didn't ship complete and they're still updating it. Stuff like screenshots and save states still are not on this machine as of my recording of this video, so maybe by this time next year you'll have a whole new suite of options. But it is one of those things. I don't even really use many of the scan lines anyway. I like just having that clean image out. Sure, you get a couple different options per setting, but I really feel like there could probably be double if not triple of the actual filters in here just to kind of play around with things. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, do you use scan lines and filters or do you go clean as well? And if you do have an Analogue 3D, what have you found to be the best combination of things? I would say at least on my LG C4 OLED that just basic scan lines look good, but again, I like that clean look out because I just want to see the N64 graphics the way I always remember them, but if I want scan lines, I want to play on a CRT. But as I talked about in the Analogue 3D versus Mr. FPGA video, the overall function seems to be near to one-to-one identical. Yes, Analogue 3D fails a lot more of the accuracy test compared to real N64 hardware or the Mr. FPGA core, but in practice, it is very difficult to tell a difference between the two of these things. That's why when I talked about which one I would recommend, I just said, if you want cart reading, of course, Analogue 3D is going to be your only option until M64 is in everybody's hands, and if you didn't care about cart reading whatsoever, then Mr. FPGA delivered the same experience plus like 500 more cores for about the same cost. I get that Analogue 3D is a very specific project and clearly I was intrigued enough to buy one because I am doing videos on it, but you really do kind of have to ask yourself which one is it that you want to play around with and what is your use case scenario. But if you have had Analogue since day one, leave me a comment down below and tell me how you're finding it. I really would be curious. Now as far as the synthetic tests are concerned, we have a new test run which is going to show Analogue 3D passing a lot more tests than it did before, the same 99% effective rate that Mr. FPGA did. But the question is, why is Mr. FPGA passing the same rate on both tests basically, where Analogue 3D has a big variable between two? And that is why synthetic tests always answer a lot of questions, but honestly pose even more questions. It is a fun piece of data set, but honestly, we're never quite sure exactly how to interpret them because two different tests will do two different things. So as far as the actual accuracy is concerned, it is still out for debate, but honestly, it's basically par at this point in time. But the weird thing about that is you get a game like Peach's Fury that will not run on Mr. FPGA and the N64 that does run on Analogue 3D, and that's just because it has an extra feature set implemented that didn't really have anything to do with the stock N64 hardware and its usage. And it's one of those things, this can be made to work on Mr. and it might work on Mod Retro M64, but even though you have a situation where the accuracy is much less, it will run one game that Mr. FPGA won't, and that's always kind of an interesting thing. Really, these things aren't apples to oranges. They're basically Fuji apples to Granny Smith apples. They're achieving the same thing, they just have a slightly different flavor going on. But remember, when you buy Mr. FPGA, you don't just get one apple, you get an entire orchard's worth if those orchards are cores. And when you buy Analogue 3D, you get the Fuji apple, you get one. It is shiny, it is delicious, but that's all you're getting in your bag. But moving over to something like Diddy Kong Racing with the performance patch, this is one game, and I tested it again, that just crashes Analogue 3D, and you basically have to quit the game versus it working on Mr. FPGA. So honestly, I can find one example of one game working that the other hardware won't run in both directions. That really is an interesting thing. But I will say my number one favorite function of the Analogue 3D is all of the different overclocking. You just get so many more frames out of the games than you would on stock N64 hardware or on the stock hardware setting on Analogue 3D. It just works, it does an incredible job, but again, that is something we have on Mr. FPGA with the Turbo Core as well. So that's kind of my takeaway of buying the Analogue 3D. It is a very pretty system, it looks great next to the television, it does native 4K, allows me to use my original N64 controllers features and just gives me more frames per second in games that absolutely need it. And I think that definitely is a huge win on the Analogue 3D side of things. I still wish Analogue the company was much better at communication, or really communicated with their actual buying public in general, and I do wish that this thing had shipped with all the features that Analogue advertised for it, so much so that Analogue has actually changed their website to remove mentions of those features, which I think the community in large kind of felt was a little bit weird. I know sometimes I make fun of Analogue missing their shipping delays, but those things do happen. I really just wish that Analogue would actually prioritize telling people what is going on. But outside of that, the actual day-to-day use of something like Analogue 3D is quite an enjoyable experience. It's done everything I wanted it to. It lets me use my flash card, so it lets me use my LG C4 OLED, and it lets me just play N64 games from back in the day at a faster frame rate, and that definitely makes a huge difference. And as far as the actual overall image switching here from 240p to 480i in Resident Evil 2, it also does an excellent job at that. So really there isn't much to point to on the Analogue 3D side of things to say that it is having issues or any sort of problems. Yes, it's missing some feature sets, yes, it's less accurate than Mr. FPJ, but in a day-to-day experience, if you just walk up to it, put in a cart, and that cart is clean, you're going to be playing that game on Analogue 3D, just like a real N64 console. So you can just sit back, relax, play the game, and enjoy yourself. And I think that definitely makes a big difference when it comes to actually just enjoying the gameplay time. Because a real N64 on a modern TV, even with a scaler, unless you have an RGB mod or an HDMI mod, it's just not going to look that good. This system was definitely always designed around a CRT television because that's all we really had back when it launched. And that is one thing that I wish Analogue had worked on for this thing. I know dozens upon dozens of people in the comments talk about the fact that they just wish they could hook this thing up to a CRT television. So don't worry, I am playing around with that in the background to figure out the best methodology to run Analogue 3D, not on a 4K television, but on a 240p monitor, because these games need that look. Because something like Mario Kart Amped Up here in widescreen with the extra performance does absolutely feel more like an N64 Pro than an actual N64, and I think that definitely benefits the system. The only other thing, at least for me, that I really enjoy about it versus my real N64 is the fact that it'll take all the region's carts. There is no cart slot key in the back there, because I've never actually opened up my Nintendo 64 to cut the plastic out. It is stock, it's never been modified, I have the original box for it, so I kind of feel bad going in there and just cutting off plastic bits. Sure, it's not the rarest machine in the world, but I see no reason to actually do so. So if you have a collection like me where you have Japanese, North American, and even PAL carts in your N64 collection, this does allow you to kind of run them interchangeably without having to cut plastic off the cart slot or use some sort of adapter, making it look a little bit more like the Sega Tower of Power. So this is definitely something I'm not surprised that Analogue did it, but I am glad to see that they've kind of considered this thing for all regions. Even if Bomberman Hero crashed on day one in the PAL territory, my favorite game of all time, but of course I wasn't playing that version, so I didn't find out until commenters actually told me about it. Now, this is definitely a nice touch, and I like that Analogue has thought of a lot of things just like this. So that kind of is the fun part about doing a more long-term review. I get more time to enjoy the hardware, I get more time to experience it, and I get more time to tell you guys what I think about it. So here's what I think about it now after using it for about a month. I think it does a great job running N64 games and running cartridges, and I think it has a great design. It definitely needs those save states and other features that were promised that didn't ship with the console, so unless those have been added, I'll change the note in the description if they have by the time you watch this. I feel like Analogue definitely has more work to do on the overall operating system and its feature set. By just sitting down on my 4K TV and playing some N64 carts in Analogue 3D with an original N64 controller just work for me. But the question is, would I replace my Mr. FPGA out of my system for this? And of course I would not. Not because I don't think it does as good of a job, just for the fact that the Mr. FPGA, when I'm done playing N64, if I want to jump over to PlayStation 1, Saturn, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, or hundreds upon hundreds of arcade cores, I just push a button because of course Analogue 3D is a single-use device. But that's my long-term review. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.